with assault, but spectators corroborate her claim that she is a victim. "I saw him fall, but I heard her say multiple times, 'Don't touch me there,'" said Kraft. He continued to push and wave his arm, which of course he's going to brush her breast, and put his elbow on her breast. "She said, 'Don't put your elbow on my breast, now you are sexually assaulting me,'" said Vasquez. This is just classic. She clearly screams repeatedly, "Get your hand off my breast now."
Get the fuck off me! Get your hand off my breast now! Get your hand off my breast now!
Yet the goalposts have now well and truly been shifted to some strange alternate reality, where he sexually assaulted her with his elbow. Even though she approached him, and he was up against a ledge, so could not move backwards. And he was clearly keeping his hand high so he could not be accused of grabbing her breast with his hand. So we now have a situation where she shoved her breast into his elbow, yet he, in the eyes of some, is the one guilty of sexual assault. Fucking amazing. For the record, I believe the text originally came from newschannel5.com, but has since been removed. This clip is the perfect example of the bad behavior we all, on both sides, should be condemning. We start out with a person preaching an unpopular message. Even though that message may be unpopular, it is still protected under free speech. But those who disagree with the message decide to silence the message. She starts by demonizing the speaker, by accusing him of sexual assault. This gets her sympathy and support from the crowd, and encourages mob mentality. This then enables her to commit an act of unprovoked violence. As the guy has already been demonized, and she has taken the role of victim, the mob doesn't see, or question, her violence. In fact, they willfully excuse it. This is the type of thing we should be more concerned with, than Roosh just getting a beer, or two thrown in his face. It's not the beer in the face which is the major concern, but the moral outrage and mob mentality that allow it to happen in the first place. Because the next step could be very much more than just a beer in the face, and as we saw from the Roosh clip, it was heading that way. Just because you think someone is an arsehole, doesn't mean you have the right to assault them. But back to Paul's article. The MHRM is a non-violent movement. AVFM is doggedly anti-violence. We ban people from this place for even hinting at violent retribution against feminists or their enablers. Those positions, however, should not be confused with the intention to meet physical attacks with turning the other cheek. Being an advocate for non-violent change does not mandate anyone to be a punching bag. Once again I have to agree with Paul. Everyone should have the basic human right of self-defense, and no one should be expected to just take it if they are being assaulted. Of course, needless to say, your response should be proportionate to the attack. Next. In the case of Roosh, a feminist threw a drink on him. Another feminist on Twitter suggested that people should pay attention to the fact that alcohol is combustible. It was retweeted and favorited several times. Apparently Roosh is running around Montreal right now covered in alcohol. I'd like to remind you all that alcohol is flammable. Throw smokes. Banneries at Orgasmic August 9, 2015. Okay, Paul's lost me here. And if he's suggesting this is a real incredible threat, then he is venturing into the Sarkeesian zone. People trash talk on Twitter all the time, including Paul. Next. So here is the proposition that is difficult. In the minds of most people, self-defense is human right. I am also venturing a guess most people would believe that any response to violence should be proportional. In other words, the aim is to respond to violence with sufficient force to meet and stop the threat and no more. I agree with this approach. Someone slapping me does not give me the right to shoot them. Okay, back on track I see. Once again, I agree with this. Next. The problem in this scenario is that the decision on proportion is not quite that simple. Extreme feminists have become pathologically violent. So-called moderate feminists, and even equity feminists have thus far remained mostly silent about it. In that they continue to feed and enable extremism while claiming they have no connection to it. Once again, this is very true. Next. Here's the deal. Given the current climate, it becomes rationally questionable whether a feminist throwing a flammable liquid on me intends to ignite it. My personal option at this point would be to assume they would. Thus I would make my response proportional to someone trying to incinerate me. That means they would have to go down and at the very least be completely incapacitated, by any means necessary. Oh boy, and Paul was doing so well up to this point. Although I guess it's technically possible, I don't recall ever hearing about someone at a bar or nightclub, having a drink thrown on them, and then set on fire, and doing a quick internet search I couldn't find any such cases. I'm sure it's probably happened somewhere at some time. But really is extremely unlikely, and probably an impractical way to hurt someone. Sure, throwing a glass of scotch on them would be easy, but actually setting them on fire just doesn't seem all that believable. Taking into account a small amount of alcohol in the glass, and the likelihood that someone isn't going to just let you shove a little lighter in their face, is just not practical. Sure, it's great in the suspended belief universe of a Hollywood movie, but reality works a little different. I would like to see the Mythbusters test it though, just out of curiosity. Who knows, I could be wrong. But I think a far more believable scenario would be for a feminist to just punch you in the face, or even more likely, to convince a group of white knights to do it for her. I honestly don't know what Paul was thinking here. He sounds like a feminist explaining that it's okay to assault a guy hitting on you, because he could be a rapist. Disappointing, Mr. Elam. But let's continue with the article. Next. Personally, I think it would be a really bad idea to wait till you see them strike a match. It is now reasonable to assume that this is what they are going to do. This position does not come without some potential cost. First, if a feminist throws a drink on me and I respond by knocking them unconscious, I will likely be arrested. Of course, if I hit a female feminist who is aiming a flamethrower at me, I will also go to jail, so the distinction is nicht. The question for me is whether I will risk being immolated in order to not be arrested. I won't. And while each person has to make their own decision, I don't suggest anyone roll the dice on these insane ideologues. Come on, Paul, seriously? You are making good points about some extremists possibly resorting to violence. That I could agree with. And you are making good points about self-defense being a right, that is, proportional self-defense. Once again, that's something I could agree with. But knocking someone out for throwing a drink on you is not fucking proportional. This is where you lose me. Now, in fairness to Paul, he did use the term flammable liquid, and if we were talking about petrol or kerosene, and the person who threw it was reaching for their lighter, then yeah, he would be justified in punching them out. But the specific scenario we are talking about is a drink in a nightclub, or pub, setting, which at most is a shot glass or two of alcohol, usually mixed with Coke or soda or whatever. So unless they grabbed the bottle from behind the bar, and started to pour a sufficient amount over your head, while reaching for their lighter, punching them out is not going to be fucking proportional. Next. Much of this could be avoided, though. One option is for MRAs to throw in the towel and bow to violent ideologues. On planet Earth, there is a better solution than that. It would be for feminists to start self-policing and rid themselves of violent advocates. Unfortunately, there does not seem to be a place on planet Earth where any feminists willing to confront the sickness in their movement exist. Once again, I agree with this. Obviously, this shouldn't only apply to feminists. But excusing, or turning a blind eye, to their extremists is something feminists in particular are very good at. The Michaela Morales story I showed earlier is the perfect example of this. She was clearly guilty, not only of making a false sexual assault claim, but of initiating violence. Yet her actions were excused by her peers, and she was referred to as the real victim. Next. In the end, I am betting this time of crisis will not be long-lived. The feminist narrative is increasingly being recognized for the joke that it is. The time will soon come when very few people will even admit to being a feminist, much less take the risk of assaulting people in its name. Well, yes and no. it is true that more and more people are waking up to, and talking out against, feminist ideology. But at the same time that ideology has become extremely entrenched in our media, our educational systems, our government, and our culture in general. Changing that will take generations. Next. Till that happens, though, I think feminists of all kinds should be aware that belonging to a non-violent movement does not mean you are a pacifist. As an MRA, I am willing to die for my beliefs. I only think it prudent to caution that I am equally willing to kill to protect myself. Okay, so that's the end of the article. And the only time Paul mentions killing is in relation to protecting himself. I read this as a general statement on self-defense, as opposed to the specific case of having a drink thrown in your face. And once again, I'd agree with Paul, provided that response is proportional, and your life is in danger. If someone pulls out a gun, and is clearly intending to kill you, you fucking better believe you have the right to kill them first. So if that last sentence is a general statement on self-defense, which is how I read it, then Paul is 100% correct. Of course Man Boobs Futrell doesn't see it that way. And although I would agree that Paul goes too far when claiming he should be able to punch someone out for pouring a drink on him, at no point does he claim he should be able to kill them for pouring a drink on him. But why let the facts get in the way, right Futrell? Of course Futrell isn't the only one to jump on Paul's article. The mouse-breeding, mouth-breather did as well. From Man Cheese. Paul Elam's nonviolence turns violent after Roosh's Canadian experience. Paul Elam incites his male audience to do violence against women. Against women? That's strange, isn't it, because Paul was talking about self-defense and feminist extremists. Not specifically women. Are we to believe that Sale Polani, aka Man Cheese, thinks Paul wouldn't defend himself from an attack from a male feminist? That he'd just sit there and take it? That he'd only defend himself against a female attacker? Of course she doesn't. But what she has done here is no different than what Michaela Morales did when she screamed, "Get your hand off my breast now." Sale has set Paul up as the bad guy, and anyone with a vagina as his victim. But let's read a little more. She goes on to say, in a bizarre rant sticking up for Roosh, the dude who advocates for rape to be legal on private property, Elam has told women that he will kill them in an article called, "Don't Mistake My Nonviolence for Pacifism." Oh, so when Paul said, "I only think it prudent to caution that I am equally willing to kill to protect myself," he was only talking about protecting himself from female attackers? Really? So Sale would have us believe that if a man approached Paul in a dark alley, and pulled out a very long sharp hunting knife, and made it clear that his intentions were to kill Paul, that Paul would just let him do it, as opposed to trying to defend himself, because the guy had a penis instead of a vagina. Makes perfect sense, Sale. I'm so glad you are around to explain reality to us. Next.